First, I don't think victims should ever have a decisive say in the sentence for any crime. Victims are hurt, they're distressed, they're traumatized, and very frequently lashing out. And you can have a parent whose child was run over in a sidewalk by a person who was having a medical condition while driving a car, and they may want the death penalty because they're so injured. So while I respect victims and I respect their opinions, I think that we need to let prosecutors and judges with cooler minds weigh every crime compared to every similar crime and make that decision, and not just leave it in the hands of victims who are grieving and injured. As for the question about whether maybe death is life in prison is better than death, different people feel differently. Even the inmates feel differently, and a lot of the inmates on death row support Prop 66 because they don't want to get rid of the death penalty. They think they're going to keep their special privileges, which is high irony. But what you have to remember at the end of the day, and the death penalty opponents don't like to mention this, is if you get rid of the death penalty, it doesn't get rid of the appeals and it doesn't get rid of the costs. You're still going to have sentences of life without parole, you're still going to have sentences of life, and that means you're still going to have appeals, and those appeals are still going to take time and they're still going to cost money. They don't go away. Most of these are fixed costs. You might reduce some of them, but they're not going away. And at the end of the day, you're still going to have to pay for that. And the other thing that you have to factor in, and it sounds somewhat macabre, but the fact that these inmates will spend the rest of their lives in prison until their death means that we're going to be paying huge medical bills for an aging prison population. We're going to be paying for their dialysis. We're going to be paying for their arthritis medication. And end-of-life medical costs are some of the highest costs any of us will experience in their life, and you cannot discount the fact that we will also be paying that cost in addition to their housing.
Interesting. All right, Kelly, you want to respond?
Yeah, just very quickly. Don't take our word for this. Look at what the legislative analysts said, that if Proposition 62 passes, there will be savings of approximately $150 million every year, and it will increase as time goes by. So, yeah, they're going to be in prison, but they're going to be double bunked. And they're not going to have their own television. They're not going to have their own computer. And they're going to have to stand in line with everyone else to get their food. And if they're sick, they're going to have to stand in line to see a nurse or see a doctor. That is punishment. So I don't feel sorry for any of these people who've been rightfully convicted. But there's a price to pay if we keep the death penalty. Talk about the innocent, but also just talk about what useful purpose does it serve? Michelle says it's justice. I still ask, what useful purpose does it serve?
Let me ask the two of you a practical question that came up a little before this debate. We haven't had, the death penalty's on the books. We haven't had it implemented for 10 years. It's not just having to do with all these due process concerns relating to the facts of an individual case. It has to do with legal issues surrounding the state's lethal injection procedures. Can you talk a little bit about the procedures used for the death penalty, what's going on with that line of jurisprudence, and why it is that we use lethal injection versus other types of capital punishment?
All right, this will only take an hour. California used the same 3-drug protocol that was used nationwide. It was developed by a pathologist in Oklahoma. It was supposed to sedate you, cause paralysis, and stop your heart. That was challenged in federal court, and the court upheld the challenge with some limits and stopped the state from using it. The court said, hey, all these other states are going to a single drug protocol. California, why don't you do that? And California says, well, there was some hemming and hawing, it didn't work out, and that's what ultimately stopped executions in California. They got hung up over the 3-drug or 1-drug protocol. They went back, did it all over, renewed the protocol, did it again, and they again came up with a 3-drug protocol. Not the best decision, I have to admit. That was Governor Schwarzenegger's watch there. Now the state is working on enacting a new protocol, and anytime the state enacts a regulation, it has to go through a process, a vetting process, like any other law in the state, and it's called the Administrative Procedures Act. And right now, the state is trying to enact a single drug protocol, which has worked, shall we say, successfully, dare I use that word, in other states, and has withstood a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals challenge and Supreme Court challenge, and is being used very effectively in other states. So the state is in the process of enacting that right now, and it's going through the Administrative Procedures Act process. Prop 66 would exempt the protocol from the Administrative Procedures Act process. And the reason is the state is already answerable to the Supreme Court, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and to the United States Supreme Court in having a protocol that complies with the Constitution. The Administrative Procedures Act requires them to respond to comments from anyone in the entire country, actually in the entire world, there's no limitation about this, and the last protocol was thrown out because when they got about 30,000 comments, the Department of Corrections failed to respond to about 12 of them. And that's one of the rules of the Administrative Procedures Act. So the last protocol got thrown out on a technicality. Prop 66 would exempt it from that technicality. So the Department of Corrections would be answerable only to the federal courts and the Supreme Court, and of course the inmates could also challenge the protocol.
What about firing squad?
I think firing squad has technically not been held unconstitutional, but no one's using it anymore. Yeah, they're thinking about it. The state does allow still use of the gas chamber, but that has been ruled unconstitutional, but an inmate can still choose that option. So what state law says right now, and none of these propositions change any of that, is in California, the only legal method of execution is intravenous injection. And I will say it does change one thing. Prop 66 would also allow in some circumstances intramuscular injection, which is not mean at all. It's like when you go to the doctor and you get a shot in your butt or your arm.
The idea is it's more humane, it's less pain.
Oh, the lethal injection protocol was designed to be more humane, obviously, than firing squad or the gas chamber. That was the very purpose of it. And the single drug protocol is intended to be much, much safer and have a far lower likelihood of any suffering than the prior 3-drug protocol.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that information. Let's now open up the floor to questions.
And because there's one microphone, I will ask you, I'll come to you and then I'll run the microphone back. So right here in the front row, what's your question? If you can, say your name and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Noah. I'm from around here. I'm a high school student. This is to Deputy District Attorney Hannessy. Hi. Sorry, I formatted this really awfully. While you were graphically retelling the cases of those bizarre offenders using their media names and all that, it made me I did format this better. Wonder, as a morally inclined citizen, if the truly sadistic, by the forensic psychology use of the word, which offenders, which are very much a minority of violent offenders, if they're deserving of death, and they're such a minority, are you playing into the sort of cosmic importance of good and evil in a performative way? If there's no obvious and quantifiable direct deterrent effect from it?
Thank you, Noah.
All right, I know exactly what you're asking, and it's a fascinating question. You do see a lot of psychopathy in murderers. Psychopathy is not considered a legal mental illness. It's considered a personality disorder. But I have seen those really unique and rare individuals who you see torturing children and committing violence from a very young age. And you wonder, is there something biologically wrong with them? And if there is, should they be punished for their conduct? I mean, is that the question we're looking at here?
No, I'm not asking about a question of sort of essentialism in neurology or anything like that. I'm asking more okay, yes, these people do exist. That's been very well recorded since forensic psychology's inception. But is it worth it? Since if you look at the violent offenders, you don't make it seem this way, but sometimes, for instance, the media, which is a lot of times the only thing that people seek out, makes it seem as though the prevalence of serial killers, rapists, or other bizarre, sexually or sadistically motivated killers, because that is a rare thing to be, the number is much, much larger than it actually is of violent offenders. And is that proportionate to the amount of thought and effort we're putting into giving these people special punishment?
Right. So he's saying, the sort of extreme cases that you mentioned are actually few and far between. Right. There are certainly, they exist, but there really aren't the vast majority of the homicides that exist. And so the question is, given the fact that there doesn't appear to be a deterrent associated with the death penalty, is it fair to make this decision based on this small portion of the cases? Is that right?
Yeah.
All right, well, first, I think there's probably more than you know. It certainly doesn't show up in the media, but there are a lot of, this isn't a secret. You can look up the facts of death row cases on the internet. There are far more than you know. But that being said, you never decide all cases based on one case, is the best answer I can tell you. Every single person on death row had their case decided on an individual basis based solely on their own conduct. So you can't sort of look at it on a statistical basis about how many of these serial killers there are versus people who are not serial killers. Every case is on its own merits. And there are a lot of people on death row who aren't serial killers, but who may be murdered for other reasons, financial reasons. There's a very rich man, Mr. Fayed, on death row who paid to have his wife murdered, for example. That was a recent Los Angeles case. You should never decide such an important decision based on statistics or likelihoods. Every case should be decided solely on the facts of that individual case, and that is how they're done.
But I think part of what he's bringing this cosmic argument, if there isn't a real deterrent, why would we do this?
Exactly.
Okay. Studies differ on whether there's a deterrent effect. Oh, yes, they do. Oh, yes, they do. Okay. All right. I made notes, Mr. Garcetti. The Emory University study of 2003, the University of Houston study of 2001, University of Colorado 2003, Zimmerman study of 2008, just to name a few. But
It's on record.
I can't contradict him. You know he hired me.
I'm proud of it.
It's one of your best hires.
All right. Here's the short answer. If the death penalty deters even a single murder, then an innocent life has been saved. If it doesn't, then justice has still been done for the crimes committed by that individual. And that's the best answer that I can give you. At some point it stops being philosophical and starts being very visceral and very real and based on the facts of the cases.
So let's see, right here in the back, move on over to you. Yes, sir, what's your question? Your name and where you're from?
Yes, Matt from Echo Park, Los Angeles. My question is for you, Mr. Garcetti. First of all, thank you very much for your service to the city of Los Angeles. My question is, you described yourself as pragmatic and that you don't have a moral issue. And it seems like Prop 66 addresses some of the concerns that you had as far as the cost of the death penalty. My question for you is, if you are not morally opposed, what would have to change with our current death penalty to make you in favor of it? What would a potential Prop 66 need to include to get your support?
Great question.
I believe Proposition 62 raises severe or substantial, 66, I'm sorry, severe constitutional questions. Foremost is the issue about forcing lawyers to take cases. I couldn't believe it, but on October the 13th, I think the first time ever, the Orange County Register and the Daily News both, who've never been anything other than pro-law enforcement, both came out, opposed to Proposition 66, and for the most part it was because of this one issue, but also the cost involved. There's no savings. Again, if you read the booklet, the election booklet, the legislative analysts will tell you that Proposition 66 will cost tens of millions of dollars. And where's that money going to come from? You've got to go to the legislature to get that money for more lawyers, more judges, pay them more money, some maybe that's an issue too. All of these issues are involved there, and it's simply not going to happen. It hasn't, truly, when you have a John Vandekamp and you have others who, 10 years ago put together something similar to this, but even, I think, probably even more comprehensive than this, and they couldn't get it passed. They couldn't even get an introduction of a bill by Republican or Democrat in the legislature. It's not going to happen. I'm also bothered very much by how many people have been found in the nation and in the state of California who wrongfully been jailed. and these are not all death penalty cases, but juries, prosecutors, judges make mistakes. If you make a mistake on a death penalty case, it's the worst thing. What was the final thing that got England to move away from the death penalty 46 years ago? It's because they executed a man, and after his execution, they found out that he was innocent.
Okay, so the way you'd rewrite it is you would take out this requirement for, albeit qualified but unwilling attorneys to take on these death penalty cases, and I can see the argument there. I mean, ultimately, you say, well, you want these people to do their work, but at the same time, if they don't want to